Hi folks, this is Jeremy McCandless here, recording some extra bonus material. This time, some of my thoughts and ideas that I did in preparation for a meeting I attended very recently where I met with a psychology study group and discussion group who gathered together to discuss Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, his book published in 1899, in fact his first major work. Now, I have to add these are just my thoughts, my musings that I came up with in preparing to offer a Christian perspective and a Christian apologetic in relation to both Freud and his teaching. But I would stress that I'm not a psychologist, just a preacher and a Bible teacher who tries to find helpful answers that how I can approach some of these challenging ideas. Now, I have to say, when approaching Sigmund Freud, I'm not an expert in his field by any means. I'm not even an expert in psychology. But in terms of the preparation, we focused wholly on the work, or I did anyway, of his first initial book, The Interpretation of Dreams. He's such a massively complex character who's written so widely on so many things. I felt it best if I just focused my attention very narrowly on the one area, which was his teaching as interpreted in this very early book, The Interpretation of Dreams. And the way in which I've approached it is actually a critical analysis of his theory of dream interpretation and comparing and contrasting it to the examples of revelatory dreams as seen in the Bible. So my plan is not to go into too much detail about him or his teaching in other areas, but just to give you a very quick biography of the man as some background, and then to examine what his book actually teaches. And then in the third part of it, I shall look at his theory of dream interpretation and look at it in comparison to those examples of dreams, visions, revelatory dreams as seen in the Bible. And then finally try and reach some conclusion about where it sits alongside those of us who would have a Christian faith. So I hope you find it helpful. And we'll start off, I'll just give you a little bit of background and a biography of our friend Sigmund. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist, but that was his starting point. But of course, he's considered by many to be the founder of psychoanalysis, which in itself was a revolutionary psychological theory that has to be said had a massive impact on the field of psychology and in the understanding of the human mind at that time. He was born on May the 6th, 1856 in Freiburg, Moravia, which is now part of our modern-day Czech Republic, and he was born into a Jewish family. He was the first of 8 children, the older, and his father, Jacob Freud, was actually a wool merchant. At the age of 4, Freud Sr. moved his family to Vienna, where he spent the majority of his life. The young Sigmund showed intellectual potential from a very young age. He was also a diligent student, so after completing his secondary education, he was enrolled at the University of Vienna to study medicine. Whilst pursuing his medical degree there, Freud developed an interest in the emerging field of neurology, and he decided to specialize and focus his research on the nervous system. After graduating with his medical degree in 1881, Freud began working at the Vienna General Hospital, specializing in neurology. During this time, he collaborated with Jean-Martin Charcot, who was a renowned French neurologist, and it was there he was first introduced to the concept of hypnosis as a therapeutic technique. Charcot's work had a profound influence on Freud and shaped his understanding of the unconscious mind, and he began to feel that he should consider looking at the potential of finding ways in which he could facilitate psychological healing in people who were struggling. Freud eventually did move away from hypnosis, and he began developing his own, what he called a psychotherapeutic method, which has become known as psychoanalysis. He drew together a variety of disciplines, taking some ideas from biology as well as psychology and philosophy. Freud's psychoanalytics focused on the exploration of the unconscious mind, as he called it, and its influence on human behavior. It was in 1899 Freud published his groundbreaking work, The Interpretation of Dreams. This is his first work, and he later developed his ideas in much more detail. The sexual obsessions that some would accuse him of do not appear at a deep level in this book. They would later be dug out at a much deeper level later on, but they do begin to appear here. But what he did introduce in this book was his theory on dream analysis and the significance of the unconscious. This marked a turning point in the field of psychology and established Freud as a prominent figure in the Viennese intellectual community. He continued to refine his psychoanalytic theories and the ideas that he was developing by delving into topics such as what he called repression, and of course he developed the famous Oedipus complex and the role of sexuality in human development. He believed that individual behaviours and psychological issues were rooted in unconscious conflicts and repressed desires. Despite initially facing resistance and skepticism from the medical community, Freud gained a dedicated following of students and colleagues who were entranced, some might say, and who embraced his revolutionary ideas. And in 1902 he founded the Wednesday Psychological Society, which later became the Vienna Psychoanalytic Societies, whose members would discuss and explore psychoanalytic concepts that they were testing and employing. Throughout his career, Freud faced various family, personal and professional challenges. He endured the loss of family members, including his father. That's to be expected, of course, but also two of his brothers, as well as his second daughter, who died whilst pregnant with what would have been his grandchild when she died in the 1920 flu epidemic. He also battled his own health issues, such as cancer of the jaw. Despite these difficulties, Freud continued to push the boundaries of psychological understanding, within the context of his day, of course, and he wrote numerous influential works following on from this, where he went further and further down the direction that was launched off by this first book, and his other famous works include The Ego and the Id, Totem and Taboo, and Civilization and its Discontents. In 1938, the Nazi regime began to rise to power in Germany, but also in Austria, where Freud was based. And Freud had got to the point where Freud and his family were forced to flee Vienna, due of course to their Jewish heritage. They sought refuge in London, where Freud would spend the remainder of his life. Despite the challenges of his relocation and his declining health, Freud continued to work and to write. There is a huge library of his work, 25 million words, some say. And he still even continued to see patients until his death. A lifelong heavy smoker of cigars, he actually died of cancer on September the 23rd, 1939. Sigmund Freud's contribution to the field of psychology have had a lasting impact for good and for ill. His theories on things like the unconscious mind, dream analysis, and psychosexual development of individuals were foundational concepts in modern psychiatry, albeit many of them have been overturned today. His ideas have been subject to criticism and revision over the years, but yet Freud's legacy as the father of what we would today call psychoanalytics remains significant, and his work continues to influence people's understanding, if for nothing else but recognizing the complexities of human behavior and the workings of the mind. The Interpretation of Dreams, which is the book that we gathered together to discuss, and the book that I read prior to attending this meeting, is this initial seminal work by Sigmund Freud. The Interpretation of Dreams is this initial seminal work by Sigmund Freud. Published in 1899, this book was revolutionary. For people at that time, it laid a foundation for trying to understand the unconscious mind. And it does, in truth, remain significant and influential today, less in therapeutic settings, but certainly in popular culture. Freud begins the book by emphasizing the significance of dreams as a window into the unconscious. In his book, he argues that dreams are not mere random occurrences, but are meaningful manifestations of repressed desires and unconscious conflicts. Dreams, according to Freud, provide access to the hidden areas of the mind, allowing individuals to gain insight into their deepest desires, fears, and unresolved issues, things that he would say they weren't even aware of at a conscious level. Freud introduced the idea of what he called dream censorship, suggesting that the unconscious mind employs a form of self-censorship to protect the dreamer from experiences that they find unacceptable or anxiety-provoking. Dreams of subjects which they found caused fear or even moral panic. This dream censorship idea operates through the process of what he called dream distortion, in which the latent content is transformed into manifest content using 4 different mechanisms that he talked about. The first being what he termed as condensation, and it refers to the process by which multiple unconscious thoughts and desires can be combined into a single dream symbol or image. Then there was this idea of displacement, where he refers to a process by which an unconscious thought or desire is shifted from its original source to have a new symbolic object or image. And of course that term is all over the place in modern psychology, and self-help gurus would use this phrase all the time, perhaps not always in the way Freud would have imagined. And then he had another mechanism called secondary revision, which referred to the process by which dreams are organized to be put into a logical and coherent framework, making it accessible thereafter to even the conscious mind. And then, of course, symbolism was a mechanism by which he would refer to the use of symbolic objects or images to represent the unconscious thoughts and desires. Another significant concept discussed and introduced by Freud is the very famous Oedipus complex, which draws on Greek mythology. Freud argued that all individuals, he said, go through a developmental phase in which they experienced unconscious sexual desire for the opposite sex, whilst harbouring hostility towards the same sex parent. This complex, he believed, plays a crucial role in the formation of an individual's personality and can manifest itself in dreams as symbolic representation of unresolved childhood conflicts. British literary scholar and theologian C.S. Lewis rather amusingly attacked Freud theories by commenting, "I cannot accept Freud's theory of dreams as wish fulfillment, as I have never once dreamt of kissing my own mother." Freud explores the role of what he calls wish fulfillment in dreams, and he suggests that dreams allow individuals to gratify their unconscious desires, those things that may be suppressed or have to remain unfulfilled in the waking world. Dreams, he said, provide an outlet for those desires to be expressed, often appearing in this disguised or symbolic manner. And by analysing the dreams and the symbols and images present in the dreams, Freud believed that he could gain insight into the unconscious wishes and the conflicts that underlie a person's behaviour. Furthermore, Freud proposed that the dreams are subject to various forms of symbolism, including both personal and universal symbols. Personal symbols were those that he thought were unique to the dreamer and were influenced by an individual's life experience or memories. But universal symbols, on the other hand, he felt were shared across cultures and could in fact carry common meanings either within societies or even cross-culturally. And Freud argued that the interpretation of symbols in dreams requires an understanding of the dreamer's own personal associations and cultural context in which they exist before you can reach any conclusions. Freud's work on dream interpretation expands way beyond the analysis of specific symbols and incorporates the notion of dream series and continuity. And he suggested that recurring dreams, and those with thematic patterns, can actually provide insight into the dreamer's unresolved conflict and desires. And by analysing a series of dreams over time, Freud believed that the patterns and the recurring themes would emerge, shedding light on the underlying psychological processes at play. this is the area which is still utilized extensively by the New Age movement and those who would wish to portray themselves as interpreters of dreams. However, it's in a sense become unmoored from the original psychological context in which Freud placed it, and has in a sense morphed over and stepped into the area of a quasi-religious experience. This, his first book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was also groundbreaking because it delved into the significance of childhood experiences in continuing to shape adult dreams. Freud argued that dreams often contain memories, fantasies, and even desires from childhood, and they continue to influence the individual's psyche. And he believed that by examining childhood experiences and their impact on dreams, they were able to uncover the root cause of psychological issues and facilitate the process of healing and personal growth. And that was kind of the perspective of most psychologists for certainly the first half of the 20th century. So in terms of trying to draw this together and reach some sort of conclusion, and remember, I'm only examining Freud through the lens of his first book, The Interpretation of Dreams. For me, things get much more problematic from a Christian point of view the further down this path you journey with him. But The Interpretation of Dreams represents the beginning point in the field of psychology, not just his, but in a sense, psychology throughout the world for 50 to 70 years. And it's important because it introduced some groundbreaking concepts. The very idea of the unconscious mind, something that we talk about all the time and take off as read, probably only really exists in the way that we understand it or the way that we think about it today because of the ideas that Freud introduced in this book. His ideas of dream symbolism, the idea and the role of repressed desires, and the conflicts that they cause in having an effect in shaping our human behaviour were first considered by this work. And there's no doubt that he believed by exploring the hidden meaning of dreams, Freud felt he could unravel some of the mysteries of the human psychological experience and therefore provide a deeper understanding of the complexities of the whole human experience. So the Interpretation of Dreams still today does remain a fundamental text in the field of psychology, and it continues to influence researchers, but more so lay people to this day. However, to a large extent, many, some would say most experts today feel that much of his work has been discredited. Psychologists these days tend to feel his theories put way too much dependent on the relationship between the patient and the psychoanalyst and on the thinking and the questions asked by the psychoanalysts themselves, which is we shouldn't be surprised at considering the time that this was brought forward. There was a real lack of scientific standards and procedures, so most of his theories are not in any way that we would understand today measurable or verifiable. We can't find measurable outcomes, and actually those who've examined his patient records say there appears to be little evidence of him actually recording healing or even the improving of people. More recently, the science of neurology begins to discount the idea that dreams could be linked to desire or motion in any way. In more recent years, in the climate of a more scientific approach to psychology and psychiatry, Freud, well, he's sort of been quietly bypassed, and his books no longer appear in the reading lists of university psychology classes, except, of course, from a historical perspective. His writings and his books and his thoughts still have a tremendous influence in the fields of counselling and life coaching and other similar New Age self-help programs. But the actual number of professional psychologists, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts who today claim to be influenced by Freud has dwindled steadily over the years, and in fact dwindled greatly in recent years to the point where you hardly would find anybody who would identify themselves as a Freudian psychoanalyst. In fact, in the early 1990s, Time magazine felt it appropriate to ask on their cover, "Is Freud dead?" Today, if you visit a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it is very unlikely they'll ask you about your dreams or your past, as these are deemed irrelevant to the next generation of cognitive psychology-based therapies. and the more precise method of just helping people by developing techniques to change their mental state, alongside on some occasion prescribed medicines for those who are more seriously ill. So finally, to draw this thing together, to try and give it a Christian perspective, let's just take a little time and look at Freud's theory of dream interpretation in comparison and contrast to the examples of the revelatory dreams seen in the Bible, and we cannot deny that they are indeed there. To draw this thing together, so let's just take a little time and look at Freud's theory of dream interpretation in comparison and contrast to the examples of the revelatory dreams seen in the Bible. Sigmund Freud's theory of dream interpretation, as presented in his work, is a wholly psychoanalytic approach that explores the hidden meaning and symbolism behind the dreams, but it's based on the social climate of the time. He lived in Vienna, and at that time it was a weird mixture of a strictly moralist, repressed society on the surface, yet underneath was widely experimental, and sexual immorality was commonplace. And it is against this background that Freud posited that dreams are the fulfillment of these unconscious desires and wishes, the things that were often censored or repressed by the conscious mind. And he believed that the dreams provided a window into the unconscious, allowing individuals to gain insight into their innermost thoughts and motivations. That's in direct contrast to the examples of revelatory dreams seen in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. They serve a completely different purpose. The dreams are most often portrayed as direct messages or communications from a divine source, usually God, but sometimes angels as messengers are giving messages through dreams to guide and inform individuals of their future actions or the desired course of their future actions and decisions by God. Unlike Freud's theory, which solely emphasizes the individual's unconscious desires and wishes. You see, in contrast, biblical dreams are depicted as external revelations with a specific purpose and a message behind them and a personality behind them in the form of God himself. One key difference between Freud's theory and those dreams we see in the Bible is the source of the meaning that lies behind them. Freud's approach attributes the meaning of dreams to the individual's personal and subjective experiences, whereas biblical dreams are considered to be external, to come from outside to that person, to have had a higher, transcendent source of meaning. The biblical message are seen as messages from God himself, whereas Freud's theory just focuses on the individual internal psychological workings that are going on in the mind of the person. Heavyweight German theologians Karl Barth and Rudolf Bultmann, although coming from polar opposites in terms of their Christian philosophy, have reached the same conclusion when it comes to Freud. Karl Barth writing, "I find Freud's theory of dreams a complete absurdity." And Rudolf Bultmann says Freud's explanation of dreams is certainly the most absurd and far-fetched theory that has ever been advanced. Harsh criticism indeed. You see, many conflicts lie in the approach to dreams from a biblical point of view or from a Freudian psychoanalytical point of view. Another contrast is his use and interpretation of symbols and imagery. As I said before, Freud emphasizes the symbolic nature of dreams, and he suggests that objects seen, actions, or people within their dreams can represent hidden desires or fears. And he proposes that the dream contains latent content, which then you draw symbolic meaning out of it, by which he means that you can draw insight into actual events or images experienced in the dream that will explain your motivations in everyday life. However, in contrast, a Christian perspective and a biblical dream will often involve just an explicit and direct communication from God. Where symbols and imagery are used, it is always very straightforward in nature and not open to multiple or difficult interpretations. The messages conveyed in the biblical dreams are usually clear and do not require a complex interpretation. See the dreams of Joseph and his brother, as well as the cupbearer and baker in the Genesis account. Their lack of being able to interpret the dreams is not because they were deeply convoluted. It was the fact the people to whom the dreams were given were so out of relationship with God that they were not able to understand them. In other words, they didn't have the moral obedience by which to interpret the dream and what it meant. And furthermore, this idea of Freud's theory of dream interpretation as purely being focused on the individual's psychological state of mind binds it up in totally something that exists only within the unconscious mind of that individual. Yet, Freud believed that you could analyse and interpret dreams and you could gain some insights into perhaps the person's desires, conflicts, or maybe any all unresolved issues buzzing round in their head. And I suppose, in fairness, you can say I'm sure his motivation was ultimately to help people, to help them perhaps achieve some sort of personal growth or even psychological healing of things that were troubling them. But there's no evidence of that in his writing. But on the other hand, we see biblical dreams removed from that personal psychological state, and they serve a much broader purpose. They sit within the entire religious, spiritual context of the world in which they are given. They are given as divine guidance, providing individuals or societies or communities with directions, warnings, or even prophecies regarding important events or actions, even helping people make and telling people the decisions that they should make. British theologian John Stott is quoted as saying Freud's theory of dreams is a misleading and a reductionist interpretation of what is the rich and complex nature of human dreams and the dreams that we see revealed in the Bible. I suppose the most important thing to understand is that Freud's theory of dream interpretation, as first posited in his 1890 books, and the examples of these dreams seen in the Bible, they in effect belong to completely different domains of human understanding. Freud's theory is firmly rooted in secular psychology, and he only aims to explain it within the individual's what he called the inner psyche, while biblical dreams are embedded within the religious and spiritual framework, the Judeo-Christian framework, serving a specific purpose within that believer's faith, and their purpose is ultimately to reveal the will of God to them or the people that hear them. Examples of quotes in the Bible that highlight various aspects of the purpose of dream include divine communication, guidance, prophecy, warning, but ultimately it's all about the revelation of God's will. Dreams are portrayed as a means through which God, or one of the means through which God interacts with individuals, and through which he can convey important messages, and in effect, he can guide people's lives. Interesting to me is the first example of revelatory dream is not found in the story of Joseph, but there are even earlier accounts in the book of Genesis. For example, the account of Laban the Aramean, the brother of Jacob's wife Rebekah, when we were told there that God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream on the night and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad." And also in the book of Job, probably the first book of the Bible to be recorded chronologically in terms of the scrolls existing. Within that we see, for God speaks in one way and in two, that though man does not perceive it, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber, then he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warning, that they may turn aside from their deeds and thereby conceal the pride of man. That's from Job 33 verses 14 to 17. Further examples of revelatory dreams can be found in the Old Testament, reaching across and prophesying into the New in the likes of the book of Joel, where it says, "And it shall come to pass that I shall pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall dream visions." Just as an aside, from a biblical point of view, dreams are those experiences we have when we're asleep, but when you see the word vision used in the Bible, that is something that is given to someone while they're awake. And of course, if we actually get into the New Testament, well, one of the most famous accounts we hear of is of Mary, when her potential husband Joseph is considering leaving her because he finds out she's with child and not marrying her, an angel of the Lord appears to him in a dream, it tells us in Matthew, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child who has been conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. So, in summary, to try and pull this all together, Freud's theory of dream interpretation focuses on the individual's unconscious desires and wishes, emphasizing symbolism and personal meaning, and it makes no attempt to step outside of that framework, even when it's been taken and plagiarized and applied in ways way beyond its original remit by all sorts of New Age and other practitioners. Yet, in contrast, biblical dreams are depicted as divine revelations with a clear message, serving a specific design purpose within the religious and spiritual context in which they're found. So while both approach and explore the realms of dream, they differ significantly. In fact, I would say completely. The Venn diagram does not cross at all in their underlying assumptions, their interpretations, and the significance that Freud on one side and the Bible on the other side, the significance that they ascribe to dreams. And I agree with J.J. Packer when he says, at the end of the day, I have absolutely no belief in Freud's theory of dreams. Okay, that's it. I do hope you find it helpful. This is a free bonus episode for all my patrons. Thank you so much for supporting this ministry. Without you, the main thing that I do, which is the Bible Project Daily Podcast, would not be happening. So thank you again, and I do hope I'll be able to post you another bonus episode sometime soon. Bye-bye for now.